Hi everyone, my name is Tiffany Zhang and I'm the founder and host of Undocumented History, an online YouTube video podcast. Welcome to episode 17. In the current mental health crisis, it is crucial that we customize and individualize mental health treatment. That includes looking at racial and cultural factors that may influence one's mental health and how one seeks mental health treatment. In this interview, Ms. Choi and I will discuss the difference in mental health between Asian Americans and other ethnic groups, the difference in mental health between US-born and foreign-born Asian Americans, and the problems of lumping Asian Americans into one category when collecting health data. Here is my conversation with her. Hi everyone, and welcome to Undocumented History, an online video podcast focused on educating others about Asian culture and history, while also amplifying Asian voices and stories. I'm Tiffany Zhang, your host, and today we have a very special guest, Ms. Choi. Ms. Choi is the President and Chief Executive Officer at Asian and Pacific American Health Forum. Previously, she served as the Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor to the Obama administration in the Office for Civil Rights and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Ms. Choi, thank you so much for being here today and taking the time to join me. Before we start, is there anything else that you want to add regarding to what you do and who you are?
No, Tiffany, thank you so much. I'm really eager for our conversation. And if I could, please call me Juliet.
Okay, so I guess my first question to kind of establish some background, can you please talk about your journey and why you decided to start working in the mental health sector and Asian American sector?
Yeah, no, I love this question. And if I can take a step back, at the end of the day, the start of the day, it really comes down to my own personal experiences. Within my own family, we have journeyed through family members who needed supports and care, both for their health and well being, but also for their mental health and well being. And then also coming back and being in the space of advocating for Asian Americans and Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. It's a very personal reason why I want to do what I want to do right now, which is being the daughter of South Korean immigrants to the United States. For me personally and professionally, I feel like I've had the privilege of a wonderful education. English is my first language. I do believe I can bridge at least a couple of cultures. And so, in this current place in my time, I really thought I needed to bring my personal experiences, my professional experiences to better uplift the care and well being of all of our communities.
hmm That's such a great reason why you decided to start working in the mental health sector and Asian American sector, like connecting something that's so like personal to you. So I guess this journey led you to become the President and Chief Executive Officer at Asian and Pacific Islander American Health Forum. What are some things that your organization does to follow its mission statement, which is to influence policy, mobilize communities, and strengthen programs and organizations to improve the health of Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian/Pacific Islanders?
Yeah, no, thanks so much for that, Tiffany. And I know you like just restated our organizational mission, and it's a mouthful. Uh, so if I can state it another way, at the end of the day, for me, it is really listening to our families, our community partners. They know what our communities need. They also know how our communities thrive. So at the end of the day, it is listening to those stories, both successes and sometimes immense challenges, and translating that into how can we at the APIA Health Forum amplify, bring community voice to Washington, D.C., so that leaders, including the president, so that leaders at the White House, in Congress, at the Department of Health and Human Services, they get a better understanding really are as a really diverse community. Again, both in terms of our unmet needs. I am a civil rights lawyer by training. I will say I think there are some discriminatory practices and incidences out there. So for me, our mission at the Health Forum really is to take community family voice, translate that into what can we advocate for, put the spotlight on, create new policies, create new opportunities that will better serve our communities and our families writ large.
Hmm. That's such a great thing to hear. I feel like y'all are really following, based on what I saw on your website and stuff. Like, I feel like your organization really is following its mission statement and doing what you said, like amplifying those community voices and like amplifying them so the White House and like government officials can hear it. And I kind of just wanted to transition to talking about the mental health of the Asian American community. How is like caring for mental health or like thinking about mental health for the Asian American community different from the mental health of other groups?
Sure. I mean, that's a really big question, and I know we only have a few moments here today. I would say what's distinguishable and what's really different, particularly for the Asian American communities, is if we take a step back, it all comes down to culture and lived experiences. And so I think a lot of us, we can relate from a cultural standpoint, and I'll speak from a Korean American lens. Uh, and as immigrants to the United States, there's a great desire and sometimes pressure to show up as being well, as nothing is wrong with us. I think it also comes down to status of family. Is your family doing well? You want to avoid bringing any family shame. And when it comes to mental health, when you look at it from a United States, from a US lens, at the end of the day, it really is about, I'm not feeling so well. Something doesn't feel quite right. But I think culturally, that's very, very difficult for a lot of our communities to be able to say, I need help, regardless of age. And I will share, there's a lot of research that backs this up. I mean, I started in this space, goodness, over 30 years ago. And 30 years ago, some of the initial research I read included Asian American women and young girls actually experience very high rates of depression and suicidal ideation because of these cultural dynamics. And over the last 3 decades, not that much has changed. What has come to my attention is we have more Asian American Pacific Islander elders here in the United States, and also on the theme of just culturally, it's difficult to ask for help. There's now a higher rate of suicidal ideation, which really means thinking about suicide or attempting suicide because you don't want to be a burden to your family at the end of the day. And this is a growing dynamic for our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation. I will also add when you think about culture, we also have to think about language. And to be able to connect with one another when you're having a challenging moment in your life, you want to be able to talk to someone that maybe they look like you, maybe they can speak your language. And from a workforce standpoint, I will say there's plenty of research that confirms we just don't have enough AA NHPIs in the mental health profession. And so these are all compounding issues that I do think create that stigma in terms of seeking care when it comes to mental health issues. If I could share my one last message when it comes to seeking care for mental health, it may be very difficult for an individual family member to say, I'm not doing well and I need help. if you're a family member or someone close to a family, you may know that somebody is facing challenges. Maybe you think like, oh, they seem a little bit off. Something must be going on. Um, I would just ask all of us in English, but also in our own language to very affirmatively say, it's really important for all of us to take care of one another. That includes physical health, mental health, well being, and spirituality. I think if we could all do that just a little bit more, we would actually make a big difference in helping one another.
hmm I really liked what you said about how caring for the mental health of the Asian American community is different and like really examining the culture behind it and also like the lack of Asian American representation in the mental health sector. And I kind of wanted to delve a little bit deeper because I know you talked about like Asian elders and like the Asian parent generation. Since like the majority of Asian Americans in the US are foreign born, do you think that has kind of an impact on the situation of Asian American mental health since like not talking about mental health and or like brushing it under the rug might serve as a coping mechanism for like immigrants for some immigrants who may have gone through trauma?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned the issue of trauma. I mean, the Asian American community is so incredibly diverse. And so I also like to take the opportunity to think about different parts of the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. Some of our families in their home countries have survived war, have come to this country as refugees and asylees. So I think we really need to take that into account. And when you think about the stigma and maybe sometimes trying to sweep things under the rug, um, what I've heard from communities and families is there's an incredible pressure and desire to want to do well here in the United States. And so, in that space, it's very difficult and it's counter to our culture to say, hey, focus on me. I need help. I need support. So I just think at a very basic level, culturally, that's something I don't have the solution to it, but I do think as young people across a lot of different generations, all of us can do our part to say, it's okay to talk about these things. I do think another element is, in the recent years, especially with COVID, and the increased incidences of anti Asian hate, it can make it very, very difficult for people to say, I'm actually scared, right? Because there's this perception that you have to appear that, you have no problems. Um, so I think translated another way, I would just say it's okay for us to talk about some of our vulnerabilities and where we need some help. And I think it's okay for us to say, I don't know what the solution is. I don't know how to navigate to get some assistance and care.
hmm Yeah, and I think actually like not talking about maybe our vulnerabilities is actually like counterproductive. I feel like if like you don't have to talk about your mental health with a professional, I guess, but like but I feel like you still should talk about mental health with your friends and family or other people that you trust.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, without using the phrase like mental health, because that also doesn't necessarily translate very well into our respective languages. When we all have that, maybe I like to call it like the kitchen table conversation. Maybe it's with your like classmates. Maybe it's at your place of worship, at church or at your temple, at your school. I think another way to talk about it is just to say, I'm experiencing a lot of stress. Or maybe it's a sense of hopelessness or a sense of fear. or just saying, like, I'm worrying about a lot of things. And I think especially recognizing that we are in, recovering and moving out of the COVID space, regardless of age and generation, it's really important to have that sense of connectedness and to be able to say, it helps me if I can talk about some of my worries with other people. I really do think that would help to make a difference.
Hmm. I totally agree, and I would love to continue diving deeper into the mental health specifically for Asian immigrants. Kind of going back to what we talked about before, do you think there's a difference between like the mental health for Asian immigrants or any like foreign-born Asians versus their US-born counterparts in the way that they like approach mental health, or as you said, maybe not explicitly mental health, but kind of that kind of area?
Yeah, so if I understand what you're asking, so those that may be foreign born compared to those that may be US born, um, I really do think the biggest context to think about is from a US lens. I do think we talk about mental health, right? We do talk about depression. Goodness, next month, while it's Heritage Month for Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, I would also say May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so, from a US lens, I think culturally, and for those of us who are born here, we have other folks to talk to in other communities about mental health. For those that are foreign born and who have immigrated to the US, that's a really big community. You may be a recent immigrant who's come to the US in the last few years or the last few months, or maybe you've lived here for many years. I think the difference is how do I say this? I want to say lived experiences. So just thinking about those that may be foreign born, trauma from surviving war or political challenging environments, that's something really difficult to talk about here in the US. And also, I can't help but get over language is always going to be a barrier. So if you're a recent immigrant, these are not normal conversations, typical, I don't want to use the word normal. These are not typical conversations you have, right, in your maybe a homeland country. But also just trying to figure out what are the words that you're going to use to talk about, mental health needs or mental health struggles, I think is a big challenge. So I think it's culture, context, and language.
I agree. And also, I do feel like US for or US born Asian Americans may also face, or I don't know if you could say that, but I was also thinking about the pressures of like integration or slash, like I know integration and assimilation aren't don't mean the same thing, but like kind of just maybe some Asian Americans might feel the pressure to assimilate. So how do you think that also kind of plays into the mental health of Asian Americans?
Yeah, so the pressure to assimilate, integrate, whichever word you use, and Asian American mental health. I'm going to intentionally try to put assimilation, integration, and mental health to the side, right? So, just from a very individualized perspective, at the end of the day, we all want to feel like we belong, that we're connected to one another. And I think whether it's Asian Americans or any other immigrant population, uh, but specifically for Asian Americans, I mean, the color of our skin is different than our white counterparts. So as much as we want to like be like everybody else, we're going to show up because we look like this. I like to take a personal philosophy and outlook that, to look like this is great. This is who I am, and this is great. But I do think as a new immigrant, really wanting to desire to fit in and belong and not be casted out as an outsider or a foreigner, you're really getting into, I think, some dimensions of, potential discrimination, overcoming the model minority myth. So those are some real challenges. So again, at the end of the day, I think it's really yearning for a sense of belonging, connectedness, that you should be here, you deserve to be here. Um, you know, One last thing I will say, there is research out there. I think this is both, I want to underscore this message for anybody that might be listening. UCLA did a research that stated Asian Americans are 50%, 50% less likely to seek mental health care. So, to try to do something about that, I would say it's our non Asian counterparts that need to learn about who we are and our cultures, take that into consideration when they think about outreach to our communities and how they may deliver mental health services. And then again, like I said, like you and I were talking about earlier, I think it's for those of us who speak English well, who can bridge two different cultures, it's incumbent upon us to say, you know what, everybody else is seeking care and it's okay. And we just want to make sure we're taking care of one another.
Mhm. I definitely agree. And I know you touched like a little bit on the model minority myth, but I wanted to kind of expand on that. So, how does lumping together Asian Americans for health data promote the model minority myth?
Um, so I think lumping all Asian Americans together, and if it's okay, I'm actually going to talk about this from Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, and the model minority myth. Um, there is unfortunately this stereotype or perception for folks who may not know what model minority myth means is, oh, well, if you're Asian, you're always doing well, right? I mean, that's the shortest explanation of model minority myth, and there's actually a lot more to that. But for today's conversation, I'll leave it at that. I think lumping all of our communities together is an absolute disservice, because what ends up happening is you erase what the differences are, both in terms of our needs, our unmet needs, but also in terms of our resiliency. So when you talk about Asian Americans specifically, you're talking about East Asians, right? Chinese, Korean, Japanese. There are the South Asians who homeland is India. And then there are Southeast Asians, which include countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and so many more countries. And we are all very, very different. So the disservice of just lumping all of us into Asian American is to say, in my opinion, we don't really care what your individual culture is. We're not going to take the time to get to know you, and understand your wonderful customs and traditions that may make you different from one another. Um, for folks who don't think about this or talk about this, I think one loose analogy I'll just highlight, and this is a very loose analogy, is, you know, are all Americans the same? Right? And the answer is like absolutely not. And my loose analogy would be, are East Coasters the same or different than West Coasters? Or folks that may be in the South or in the Northwest or in the Midwest? And there are differences that I think we should all celebrate and, at a minimum, appreciate and make a commitment to get to know individual communities.
hmm I agree that lumping Asian Americans together in into one category is bad because it does, as you said, it kind of like erases the culture, but also the disparities within the Asian American communities. Because when you look at, I think in the data, like when you look at Asian Americans as one group, on average, like Asians may seem pretty healthy, but like not when you look at specific groups within the Asian American community. And it just kind of goes to show that like lumping all Asian Americans into one category, like it kind of prevents the groups that need help from getting help.
Yeah. I mean, if I could just follow up and add one more comment, uh, disaggregating the data is so critical. And then this ties back to our mission here at the Health Forum. So I always say, if you're not willing to disaggregate the data, that means at the outset you've concluded you don't care about our communities. We need to disaggregate the data. Data ensures visibility of community. It ensures visibility of community voice. A really good example is, for instance, part of our work is making sure that Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders have access to health insurance. That can be through Medicaid, that can be through Marketplace. And before the Affordable Care Act and Marketplace, believe it or not, I'll talk about Korean Americans since I am one. Over 15 years ago, believe it or not, 1 in 4 Korean Americans was uninsured, had absolutely no health insurance. Now, because we have disaggregated data, we can better identify uh, who has insurance, who doesn't have insurance, what are the disparities, what are the gaps. And when we know that, then we can develop solutions to reach out to those individual communities. That means creating materials in language, which is what we do. We'll produce critical information anywhere from 20 to 30 languages. We will talk with the White House. We will advocate with Congress and say we need more resources so we can do specific, linguistically, culturally specific outreach to our communities. Those efforts, both community, advocacy, data, it makes a difference because after a dozen years, instead of 1 in 4 Korean Americans being uninsured, we have now moved the needle where 10% of the Korean population is uninsured. Moving from 25% to 10%, when we think about language, culture, policy, data, community voice, we really can make a tangible difference for so many of our communities.
hmm I wholeheartedly agree, and that was the last question that I wanted to ask you, and also I think that's also a great note to end this interview on. So thank you so much, Juliet, for being for giving me the opportunity to interview. It was great and such a pleasure, and I guess I will see everyone watching this next time. Bye.